Hey everybody, welcome to episode 55 of FoundersGyan and thanks for tuning in. Each week we bring you the inspiring story of a startup and the founders behind the same. This week we have Mr. Pramod Raheja, the founder and CEO of MyStaffNow.com on the show. Pramod has a sales background and he gives us a sales 101 for entrepreneurs in our deep dive section. Do check out the show notes at foundersgyan.com/EP55, that is episode 55. And without further ado, let's get on with the show. Pramod, glad to have you on the show. Pramod Raheja is the founder and CEO of MyStaffNow.com, a company that matches businesses and freelance talent through data-driven decision making. We'll talk more about on the show. Pramod, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Pramod, before we get into some of the more serious stuff, I read on your LinkedIn profile that you're a captain for United Airlines, which I suppose is the pilot. So how does that work? You have your own business and you're a pilot too? How does it work?
Yes, that's correct. I started since I was a young chap, I'll say, always selling something, regardless of what I was doing, whether I was in school or early in my career at jobs. I was always kind of selling something on the side and just had this, I guess, entrepreneurial sort of bone that was there. And when I was growing up, it wasn't as it is now where, entrepreneurship is talked about quite a bit in schools and even as a young person. So I became a pilot, which was my dream. And as I was flying, I was also always doing something on the side. And about 10 years ago or so, around 10 years ago, a little bit, maybe 11 years ago now, I left flying and took a leave of absence and started another business, not the current one that I have now. And that was called Intelligent Office. And I grew that. It was an executive suite type of company that here in the U.S. that we grew in this area from 1 to 4 locations, and grew that quite a bit and enjoyed it. But I also enjoyed the flying, and the goal was to be able to see if I could do both. And so hence, I've been doing that now for a few years in terms of doing both. And a relatively full time. So how that works is, I essentially work all the time, but I don't call it work because I enjoy both very much. Right.
Okay. So you're a full-time captain for United Airlines, is it? Is that how it works?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Great. Now let's talk about MyStaffNow. You already touched on your background. I also saw a lot of startups on your LinkedIn profile again. And so you already touched on, I think, one of them. So could you just elaborate a little bit on your background and how did you start and when did you start MyStaffNow?
Sure. Background. You've got a little background there as a pilot. I was, engineering major in college, which was the path I thought I was going to take, but then got into flying, and of course, eventually into entrepreneurship. So Intelligent Office was something I started back in 2004. That was as I mentioned, an executive suite where we focused mainly on virtual services, so providing a suite of services to small to medium-sized businesses. One of those things was in a sort of a light format was some staffing. Essentially, we were the front end of for a client. And I thought to myself, why can't we be back end? And, in terms of doing their back end and helping them with other aspects of their business. So that particular business, Intelligent Office, was of course not built that way. That was not the focus of Intelligent Office. So out of Intelligent Office, the idea, as I'm talking to my clients back then, in the 2007, 2008, 2009, kind of for a few years, just learning that they really had issues with finding talent, just even for short-term needs. whether it was marketing or graphics or admin or what have you. And they typically needed specialized talent. So the talent that we had working for us couldn't handle those type of things. You had to almost create a whole new business to do it. And essentially in 2012, that's what I did. I started MyStaffNow in 2012 with the intent to do a much better job of matching freelance talent to small to medium sized businesses, and seeing that they had a pain point. And as I spoke to those potential clients and found out what they were currently doing at the time, some were doing nothing, some were asking for references, some were going to the big marketplaces online of the time, like Upwork, or at that time Elance and Odesk, and they were trying to find talent there, but it was a jungle almost to them. It was such a big place that they didn't have the time to really screen properly and find the right talent. It was almost another whole HR function. So so MyStaffNow became eventually kind of a boutique concierge where we handled everything for them. They just told us what they needed, and we handled it. And so that's where we found our niche. And since then, we've actually expanded into some traditional recruiting, which is with the employment rate low here in the U.S. It's specifically where we live. There's a lot of demand for that. And then our goal was to always really get into product. And as we built out the MyStaffNow product, we found that there was a lot of demand in other areas. And one other area that I know well from many years of experience is sales. And so we built a product just recently called Sales Matcher, which we're very excited about, as it'll probably form the basis for other products as well.
Okay, that's great. So one of the questions that I kind of had in my mind was getting your first clients would have been difficult for MyStaffNow, but since you're already kind of in the business, was that first step easy, or did you still have to do a bit of hustle to get your first clients?
Well, I'd say in any new business, there's always a lot of hustle. So even though I had another business with a client base, which was very helpful, from the network standpoint and a warm market standpoint, I still had to hustle. But yes, I mean, it did make it easy for me to test the market and to figure out if this was a good idea or not. So MyStaffNow is actually created we actually went out and we did some testing and actually got paid. And so MyStaffNow was, paid before the company even started. We provided some services to a client that we were trying to just, ask them some questions, and they said, no, we actually need help, and can you help us? And so we helped them. They paid us, and then the company was started with that first check. So we deposited the check into the bank and created the company. So the little bit of hustle was required, but yeah, the warm market certainly helped.
Right. So I think that's a great takeaway there, because a lot of startups kind of focus on building the right product or the right service before going to market, while common sense and Startup 101 dictates that you try to first find a paying customer and then kind of use that paying customer to build your product or service. So I think it worked out well for you, right, in that aspect?
Yes, correct. That is true,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, one of the other questions that I had is, like, from what I understand of your business, you have certain people on your payroll, your contract, and do you send these people to clients, or is it that whenever a new requirement comes up, you kind of source the resource at that point of time?
So we maintain a curated pool of freelancers and contract talent that we utilize as requirements come in. So those freelancers are not necessarily under our payroll. Yes, we do handle their payments and everything in between, but only as requirements dictate. So if they're not, currently doing any work, then there's no payroll, of course. But if they are doing something for a client, then of course they'll be getting paid as well. So as requirements come in, then yes, we do our best job, the best job we can to source and then of course match. And the sourcing over time has become easier just based on the fact that our pool has grown quite a bit in terms of freelancers, and we don't accept everybody. It is a bit of a niche play because we are focused on finding very good freelance talent. So as somebody enters our system on our website, we will schedule an interview with them and get to know them a little bit, get to know a little bit about their background, make sure their profile is built out properly, and then accept them or not accept them into the system. And then once we accept them, then of course we will start giving them assignments based on requirements.
Okay, and how do you actually manage this entire process? Because if, let's say I'm a freelancer and you interview me and I get accepted into your system, that doesn't necessarily mean I'll be free whenever you want me for a job, right? So how does this whole resource allocation work?
Yeah, sure. So resource allocation, well, that's I'd say, obviously it depends, right? So in many cases, freelancers, we have a pretty good core group that will know what they're working on and how busy they are. Of course, the ones that are not in that core group, that's a smaller core group, of course, that particular subset we'll have to reach out to them. So we basically maintain their profiles and contact information, within our own database. And as requirements dictate, we can search, filter, narrow down exactly who we're looking for, or what subset of types of freelancers we're looking for, and then reach out to them through a message and see if they're available, and when they're available and how much they're available, based on client requirements. If somebody needs somebody 40 hours a week, of course, that's certainly a very different requirement than if somebody needs somebody just for 5 to 10 hours a week, which is more the norm. More the norm is supplemental than it is full time. So to answer your question, because of that norm, it's not too difficult, to allocate resources, because the time requirement's typically smaller. It's more supplemental work, ongoing, whether it's graphic design or marketing or blogging. We in fact find that there are certain things that really are more predominant than others, and one of those is marketing and creating content. In this day and age, you have to kind of stay on top of your content, and that's very difficult for a small business. So we have a few products, productized services, we'll call them, where they're all sort of off the shelf. For example, a blogging product where somebody will buy 1 to 4 blogs a month or more, and it's just a set price and it's delivered on a certain date. And so we've tried to actually innovate a little bit by not just having a straight up freelance service, but actually having some products around the freelance service as well.
Okay, and I'm just looking at your site, and you mentioned that you just answer a few questions about your needs. I'm talking from a client's perspective, and you say available pros are instantly matched. So how are you able to give these instant results? Because at the back end, you still need to figure out if these people are available for the client's specific needs, right? How does the algorithm intelligently match this?
Sure. So in right now, in MyStaffNow, the client is not going to receive an automatic algorithm match. There's going to be an algorithm in the background, but then the human is actually going to still curate that and make sure that it is a good match. So even though we have our database internally that's running in the background and finding people, we're still, for the freelance perspective, still doing that matching sort of with some human curation. And one of the things, as I mentioned earlier in my background, is that we've started to venture out into other types of matching as well. And our website, you'll see in the next month or so, will probably change quite a bit to reflect that. And one of the products we built that kind of answers your question a little bit more is something called Sales Matcher, salesmatcher.com. And that product specifically actually does have an algorithm that automatically does match. So if somebody enters the system there, it actually does immediately send results. So that's the goal also with the freelancing. But we found that the freelancing was a little more difficult to do that right off the get-go. With Sales Matcher, we use a personality matching. And so it's a little bit, I won't say it's easy, but it's a little bit more, it's easier to make it a little bit more automated, because typically when individuals or companies are looking for sales people, they're looking kind of at the top of the funnel. How do I narrow down the pool? And so that's what Sales Matcher does. It's a top of the funnel product that narrows down the pool of candidates to the right candidates you should be interviewing and speaking to. Where freelance, we find that it's not so much just personality, but also the whole profile, the skill set. What are they exactly trying to do? And so while you can do some degree of matching, it's not as perfect as it could be. And so we're still working on that one, trying to make that a little bit more automated. But right now we still have when the automation on our end in the background occurs, we still try to curate with a human. So just to make it more accurate. And our matches have been pretty good. We have, quite a few clients that right from the get-go, I'd say more than 90% of the time, it's a good match. Occasionally, we'll have to replace and say, okay, let's get you somebody else.
Understood. Thanks a lot for explaining that. Now, can we talk about some numbers in terms of how many clients you serve, or how many man-hours you serve, or how many people you serve? Any statistics that you could give us for our listeners to kind of get a sense of the scale of your business?
Sure. So let's see. Within our system, we're not as big as, say, an Odesk or a freelancer.com, of course, because we're not trying to be a big, huge marketplace. So we have in our internal system that we utilize, where we draw from, we have about 3,000 freelancers at the moment. And we've worked with about 500 different companies, mostly in the U.S., although we do have international clients in the Middle East and in Europe and in India as well. And so we have clients all over the place. Let's see, what else? I forgot what else you asked me there, Ram.
Something to just give us a sense of the scale, the number of jobs you have served, or number of hours your customers have, your freelancers have worked. Something to just kind of give us an idea of how much sales are happening and things like that.
Yeah. So those are the freelancers and the businesses, but the numbers I provided earlier. But however, in terms of man hours, that's a good question. Let's see. I'd probably have to get back to you on that. But I'd say over the last 4 years, it's a big number.
Maybe you could just tell
ends up
on a monthly basis, maybe an average this many man hours you serve, or quarterly some.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So maybe on a monthly basis, that might be a little bit easier. On a monthly basis, I'd say it's probably just a ballpark right now, not exact number, would be about, hang on, I'm doing some math in my head real quick here. I don't have it right in front of me. Probably about 2,000 to 3,000 man hours, maybe a little bit north of that.
That's great. That's really quite decent, not too small, not too huge also, but yeah, I think it's quite good numbers. Now, kind of like taking a step back, you were always an entrepreneur, and you have had several different startups in your career, but many of us aren't so lucky to be born or to have that natural inclination towards entrepreneurship, but a lot of us want to get into entrepreneurship. And so could you kind of take us through the whole process of an idea to execution, or some high level steps of how you would approach an idea and turn it into something concrete, a product or a service?
Sure. I would say that, let me start out by saying that any idea, so there's many ideas, and of course, even as an entrepreneur, whether you have that entrepreneur sort of DNA or not, we all have lots of ideas. I think everybody I speak to, friends, family, everybody always has ideas about how to make something better. And I think from starting point, you always have to sell first. So figure out, and what I mean by that is figure out if your idea is something people would even buy. And so that's the first step is research. Really figuring out what's out there already, and how you could improve on it. Research can be a little bit dangerous because it might deter you, because if you see somebody that already has your idea, you might think to yourself, well, gee, somebody already thought of that. However, usually if somebody has thought of that, that's probably good because it validates somewhat your idea. But then if you go further, research, then you figure out if that idea actually is something that's popular or not. Or maybe it's in its infancy and you see it rising in popularity. And I'll give you an example. I was approached by somebody to help try to co-found a drone startup. Drones are in their infancy, commercial drones worldwide. And I'm busy running this company, of course, but I found it interesting and intriguing just to check it out. And so I just did a little research just to figure it out. And I found that, it's actually, in fact, it's quite a very much in its infancy. Although there are already businesses out there doing exactly the same thing that this particular entrepreneur is proposing. And so I would say that's my first sort of advice is if you have an idea is research it, but take everything with a grain of salt, meaning somebody may have already thought of your idea, but that's a good thing. And then go a little further to see see how much further that idea is along, and if it's too mature, the market's too mature or not. So that would be the first sort of tip or piece of advice from starting a business standpoint. Once you do get past that and you decide, hey, I'm going to continue or tweak things a little bit and continue, then I would, of course, at that point, go out and try to find a customer and actually start speaking to real customers and almost doing, again, sort of market research to really figure out if it's something that they would buy, or if they're not going to buy, who would buy. And that's very important. Once that's done and you feel like you validated what you needed to, then based on all that feedback, your product or service or whatever that you're selling should be, at that point, designed and tweaked. We still continue, even though we're a few years into MyStaffNow, we still continue to tweak and improve our processes every day. In fact, every time we speak to a client or we see something that didn't go quite right, or even something that went well, we tend to improve our processes, from internally, and that's what one day will make your business valuable, which is having a set of processes and almost a how-to manual. That is something that most companies, if they're going to buy something, they're going to be buying something that is already ready-made, ready to go, and they don't have to do a whole lot other than maybe improve things. And then once you do get things started with your company, whether it's a product or service, I also see that many companies rush to try to find salespeople. So let's use a hypothetical example of a company that might start with product A, and they build product A, they raise money for product A, they raise venture capital perhaps, and then they go out and start hiring. I would say that in the early days of your product or service, it's very important for you as the entrepreneur to do the sales, to really go out there and learn as much as you can about what you're selling and how you can improve it every day, day in, day out. Because if you try to hire for sales too fast, you'll miss some opportunities to really build something special, because you won't be, at the sharp end of the stick talking to your clients. It's not to say you can't hire a sales staff. Of course you can, but you got to make sure you're in the mix and you're very, very involved as well, especially in the early days as you build out whatever you're building, whether it's a service or a product.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into our segment on sales. I think you talked
Sure.
you touched a few times upon the importance of sales, and for our listeners out there, we are going to do a slightly deeper dive into sales. So you already mentioned that as an entrepreneur, we should be out there in front selling. Now, not everybody has a sales background, so how would we start? Let's say I'm a technical person or my skills are something else. So what would be your first advice on how we can try and sell our service or product? Let's start with that and get into a few more questions about sales for entrepreneurs, sales 101 for entrepreneurs.
Sure. I think really the initial stage of an entrepreneur selling is just really talking about what you're doing, talking about your product, talking about not necessarily the features of it, but the benefits, a focus on the benefits to your target audience. So when you build a product or service, essentially you're having to figure out early on, who is that target? Who is that target persona? Who am I selling to? Who is actually the buyer? And if you're selling to an enterprise company, a larger company, you have to figure out who within that company is your target persona. If you're selling to a small to medium-sized business, also you have to figure that out, because it could be the CEO, it could be the head of HR, it could be the VP of sales, it could be who knows who, but you have to figure that out. And that's not always as easy as it sounds, especially when you're selling to a bigger company, because there's so many functions in a big company that you have to figure that out first. And you'll probably do that just by speaking to people and figuring out who's going to benefit from this. So how you do that typically is, nowadays, of course, we have lots of technology. So we have LinkedIn and Facebook and other tools and services that we can connect people with. And so I think that in the early days, using tools like that really can help you as you reach out to people in your network. Also locally where you live, also maybe trying to find meetups and events that would be up your alley, or maybe even a small trade show or a conference, and getting out there and talking to those target personas at those events. So even though we live in an age of technology, the in-person or the one-to-one conversation still really makes a difference into the early stage success of your product, and if you're actually on the right track.
If you like the show, do follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The link is www.facebook.com/FoundersGyan and twitter.com/FoundersGyan. Both these provide you daily tips and articles as well as resources to help and inspire your startup. There are multiple tips per day. Some examples of these tips would be articles on the latest startups, growth hacking tips, how do you build team for startups, how to get funding, etc. So don't forget facebook.com/FoundersGyan and twitter.com/FoundersGyan. Right. So you raised a very interesting point about LinkedIn and Facebook and all these social messenger tools. So have you personally had success just cold reaching out to people via LinkedIn? Again, I'm talking about some of these enterprise businesses, small and medium-sized companies. Maybe you could just approach them, knock on their doors. But bigger companies, have you actually done a bit of research and found a person or got an intro to a person and have had a bit of success via LinkedIn or any of these social media?
Yeah, so just like the real world, you can go and knock on doors. You can do the same thing on LinkedIn. You could blindly knock on doors. But my advice would be to search your network that you have on LinkedIn and see who's connected to who. And from that, try to get introductions. I have been successful doing that. If I've reached out to, say, a friend and I say, hey, I see that you are connected to Joe or Tom at IBM, and I want to get an introduction. Is that possible? Do you know him well enough? That's a much better approach than just blindly trying to reach that person on LinkedIn. You can certainly try that, but I found that the warm intro is much better, or just get permission from your contact at the very least to reach out to that person and let them know that you have a mutual friend and that they recommended that you reach out. So I would say, even though you can reach out cold, and there are certainly many lead generation programs out there that teach you how to do that, and I would say that the best approach is still a warm approach, going through somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody.
Right. I think that's a very good point. I think there are always like some people in your network, in your first or second degree connections, who can give you this intro. So I think it's really wise to use that. Now, once you have that in to a specific person, could be an enterprise, could be a small, medium business. Talk a little bit more about the sales pitch. Okay, you have a meeting set up. Now, what do you think are the key aspects in a sales pitch? And maybe you could also talk about where many entrepreneurs go wrong so that we can avoid those same mistakes.
Sure. From a sales pitch perspective, I think especially in the early days of a product or service, you're really trying to get it right. You're trying to sell something that is of value, that will benefit them, but will also help you learn. And so by reaching out, again, if we use the example of a warm intro, or somebody in your network that is a part of a network you're in, reaching out to them with sort of the background of, hi, I'm, Pramod, and I have this product sales matcher, and I see that you're hiring for sales, and I would love to see if we can help you out by doing that. We're not a recruiter. We don't necessarily charge you recruiting prices, and we'd be happy, to show you how that works and how you can find the right candidates much faster than what you're doing now. And take that so figure out that pitch. What does that pitch sound like in terms of an intro? It should be very brief, but it should also give them the benefits. So in what I just described there, I gave them a benefit, which was, I'll help you find your candidates much faster. Because I do know that it takes them a long time to find the right candidates, and many times they get it wrong. So they don't have time to waste. So if I tell them that I can save them time and get them, help them become more accurate, typically I found if you have that right pitch, they're going to listen at least. And that's all you want at that point. You want them to listen. That's what you're going for. So from a sales pitch perspective, to get, because remember in sales, the first step is you want to get in front of somebody. That's the first step, and that's not always easy. And then the second step is actually, once you're in front of them, then it's a whole nother ball game as far as your pitch goes. But I would say a pitfall that many people fall into there is they try to explain all the features of what their product does or the service does, and they lose the potential buyer at that point, because the potential buyer is busy. They don't have time necessarily to listen to all that. But if you just quickly in 2 or 3 words sum up, or 2 or 3 sentences sum up how you're going to benefit them and save them time, or whatever you're saving them, money in some cases, then they're going to be more apt to take a few minutes and listen to you, and maybe get you in front of the right people at that point as well, other people within their organization.
Right. I think excellent advice, and I sense I sense a theme here wherein it's better to always talk about the benefits that the other person gets, rather than talk about the features of the product. So I think that's really excellent advice and useful. Now I just have one final question on the sales side of things. Now, getting a sales pitch is difficult. You got the intro. You have made the pitch. They are happy to listen. So you go. You start talking. Blah blah blah. Negotiations happen, and then the closing. So I think a lot of salespeople say that the closing is the toughest part, right, of the whole thing. Do you agree, disagree, and what tips would you give for closing the sale?
Yeah, so it depends. sometimes getting in front of somebody can be very difficult as well. However, closing, of course, is probably psychologically the hardest or most difficult for most people, because now they're actually asking for money, and somebody has to hand the money over. I think that if you've gone through the process and you've done a good job of selling through, from the start to finish, meaning from the initial sort of let me show you what we have to actually sitting down and signing a contract, that once you get to that point, they've bought, and so it's not as hard as it sounds in terms of trying to close that final deal. Although that is a really good point, that it is, again, psychologically very difficult to ask for that money for many people. I'd say that sales personality, which is one of the things we focus on with our Sales Matcher product, some people are born a certain way, but you can certainly become a certain way too. Your personality does change over time. The more you do something, the more comfortable it becomes, and therefore then the easier it is for one to do it. So I would say that for a new entrepreneur, or even one that's experienced, that's having trouble with the closing aspect, that if you keep doing it, then you will get better at it, and you will become more comfortable at it in terms of that asking, and always kind of honing how you speak, how you talk. And of course, a good product or good service should, to some extent, sell itself as well. That's not necessarily a true statement by itself, but if something is attractive and somebody has a need and they have a requirement that they need to fill, and your product fills that, they're going to be very interested. So it's really up to you to not screw that up. I guess would be the best way to describe that. But one of the things, if we go really tactical here, to your point about people having trouble, is they speak too much. Once the buyer has decided that they're going to buy, there's a tendency, especially if the sale is made in person. A lot of times these days we make sales transactionally on the web. People click a button and make a sale. But if you're actually sitting in a room with somebody, they have a tendency to talk too much. Once the buyer has decided that they're going to buy, the best thing to do is to limit what you need to say and just get to that close and leave the room, because at some point after that, you're going to have a follow-up. You're going to have a kickoff with the client. You're going to have plenty of time to chat, but you want to get past that hurdle of, hey, we are now clients. We have money coming from this client, or we are now doing business and we have money coming from these clients. And that's always hard, because especially as an entrepreneur in the early days, you have a tendency to give away a lot of your time. Excuse me. And you really do have to get paid as well. Yeah,
excellent advice. I think I can completely relate to that. Shut up once the sale is done is really important. We try to, especially first timers, whether it is sales or whether it's you just getting a leave approval from your boss in your job, you try to justify or keep saying thank you over and over again, which is not really necessary. That could give the other person second thoughts, So I think just shut up and just take the money once the sale is done, I think is great advice. I just wanted to ask you one final question on this. Do you have any books that you can recommend on sales specifically? If you have, that would be great. Or if not, maybe just on entrepreneurship and business creation of businesses. Are there any books you would recommend, or any resources also? Yeah, online resources.
Yeah, there's so many out there, of course, these days. But a couple of books that stand out right off the top of my head at the moment are one is a book that actually helped me in my early days when I really didn't think of myself as a salesperson. But every entrepreneur, to some extent, has to be a salesperson. And the book is called The Accidental Salesperson. So that was something that stuck out to me. I read that book many years ago. One book that I used recently in the last year that stands out is a book called Traction. And it's a great book, especially for a startup as they're getting started on how to actually market and sell. One thing we didn't talk about is marketing. Marketing and sales sometimes get meshed together, but they are essentially two different activities that intertwine, throughout the process. But they are quite a bit different in terms of, and one is trying to educate and get you in front of people, and then the actual sales is, further education and actually starting to do business together. So Traction is one. And then another book that I just recently picked up and started reading. I'm not completely through it, but I really think it's a great book. It's a book about customer service and how to design your service and your organization. And it's called Uncommon Service. How to, I'm trying to think of the title here, Uncommon Service, and how to win, just Uncommon Service. That's it. Sorry about that.
Okay, great.
Here's the subtitle. The subtitle is How to Win by Putting Customers at the Core of Your Business. So Francis Frey is the author, and it's really a good read so far.
Excellent. We'll link all those up on the show notes. I might have heard of the Accidental salesperson. I think I might have read it or heard about it. But yeah, these are great recommendations, and I'll be sure to check them out also. So thanks for that. Now, how old is your company right now? It's 4 years, right? You said it's about 4 years.
Right. That's correct.
And
that's correct.
Obviously,
yes.
There have been a lot of changes in technology, and it's really not fair to compare 4 years back with now. But assume that the technological changes. Let's assume that there are not too many technological changes, but more from a business perspective. Is there anything you do different if you start this business, say, today?
Let's see. Is there anything different that we would do if we started this business today? In spite of the fact that there have been a lot of technological changes, there's still a huge market of or audience of businesses that still haven't gotten online to find talent. Much of the searching for talent, whether it's freelance or even traditional finding, recruiting full-time employees, is still done the traditional way, which is offline. And so I don't know that there's much I would do differently in terms of marketing it as an online business. What I might do differently from a technology standpoint is get started a little bit sooner on my technology. We started the business purely as a service business initially, and then we went to more product and more online presence. So I would probably go right to online presence, from the get-go, which I think most people do these days anyways. But it's surprising to me still to see so many people so many companies still doing things offline and sort of. So yes, technology has changed, but habits have not necessarily changed in that time frame.
Okay, excellent answer there. And you have had so many different companies, and so the entrepreneurship is always like a roller coaster ride. You have your highs and your lows. But can you pick one moment? Is there one specific moment that comes to your mind when you think of a really low point? I mean, it could be this business, or it could be one of your previous ventures. Can you pick a really low point and tell us what was the lesson you learned from that moment? I mean, you could have turned it around or not. That's, I think, if you had turned it around, great. If not, that's hard luck. But I think I'd be very interested in hearing the lessons you learned from your lowest point in your entrepreneurship journey.
Yeah, there's plenty of points. As you said, it's a roller coaster, and that's very true. But one point that stands out is about 5-6 years ago when I was expanding at that time. actually 6 years ago, I was expanding, almost 7. So my timing is a little bit off there, but almost 7 years ago when we were expanding Intelligent Office, at the time I was running that full time and expanded a little bit too fast. The U.S. economy was going through a recession, and we were in a bit of a pickle with our bank, who had lent us a loan and given us a line of credit. And they came to us and said, we need you to pay off the line of credit, which was several $100,000 at the time. And there was no way that we were going to be able to do it. So we were really being squeezed by them. And it became a bit of a fight. And yeah, it could have gone one way where we could have lost the entire business, or we had to figure out a solution. And so ultimately, after probably a month of conversation and negotiations and heartache and sleepless nights, we did figure out a solution and came to that solution and moved on. And eventually, a year later, we were debt free in that particular business. So it was a relatively good story in terms of the end result. But during that process of negotiating with the bank, it was very stressful, and I really wasn't sure that which way it was going to go, because if we weren't able to pay off what they wanted, they could have easily taken our business from us and sold it themselves or done whatever they wanted. So that was the collateral at the time, and yeah, we almost lost it. So that particular one point sticks out. There's many others on the roller coaster days, and you can't make payroll or what have you, but that I've had in the past. But
and what was the biggest lesson out of that particular incident?
I think maybe a few lessons came out of that. One was that when it comes to growing and expanding and scaling a business, you do have to be careful. You have to know how to put the brakes on and when to say no. It's very easy when opportunities are presented in front of you to just say yes because it sounds great, because you can see your business growing and scaling. But if I had to look back and do that all over again, we might have slowed down our expansion and not been as aggressive. And I think that was the lesson that took away there, was that I really should have taken a good look at what we were doing. And, from a financial perspective, it was fairly obvious that we were expanding very fast and taking on more risk. And I should have been a little bit more cautious. Had I been more cautious, we would have never gotten into that situation as well.
Okay, great. I just have a couple of final questions. What is the best advice you have read, heard, or seen and try to follow in your own life and business?
Yeah, that's a good. There's so much of that as well I could give, and it's hard to pick one. But I think the one thing that always has stuck with me is this quote. I can't remember who said it, but love what you do what you love, is something that has stuck with me, that whenever I question what I'm doing, if I'm enjoying it, is do I love what I'm doing? And so that would be the best advice.
Great, excellent. So I just have one final question, but before we move on to that, how can our listeners get in touch with you? Obviously, they can check out your MyStaffNow.com as well as Sales Matcher, that is SalesMatchr without a E, salesmatcher.com, to work with you directly. That's always there. But apart from that, if entrepreneurs and listeners want to reach out to you either for discussing some business ideas, mentorship, whatnot, what's the best way? Are you active on LinkedIn, Twitter, email? What's your poison of choice?
Yeah, all of the above. Email, of course, is fine. Pramod, Pramod at MyStaffNow.com, or LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Full name Pramod Raheja on Twitter. So any of the above would be a fine way to contact me.
Great. I will link those up also on the show notes so that people can get in touch with you. And so, Pramod, I just want to just take the time to thank you and acknowledge your time and what you're doing for the economy and the startup world, not only by means of your company, but also in sharing your valuable knowledge and insights to myself and our listeners. So thank you so much for that. And with that, we'll move on to the final question now. Let's assume that whatever we have been chatting about for the past 45 minutes is not recorded at all. I mean, by mistake, I didn't turn on the record button. I'm just kidding. I did turn on the record button. But okay, let's assume that I didn't and nothing has been recorded. So we just have time for one gyan that you can give our listeners. Only one gyan. What would that be?
I would say that one word of wisdom for me is passion. I mean, I think if you're excited, when it comes to passion, if you're excited in the morning when you wake up about what you're doing and you really feel strongly about it and you get up excited, then you're passionate, and that passion will carry you through that roller coaster of emotion that inevitably comes along with entrepreneurship.
Okay, thanks a lot so much, Pramod, for your passion in giving this interview. Also, I could see that coming through. So thanks so much for that, and it was a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Ram. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure also, and thank you as well. It was a pleasure.
Tushar, thank you so much for coming on the show to answer questions with regards to IP, trademark, and all those jazzy stuff. If any of you listeners out there have a question that you'd like Tushar to answer, please use the hashtag #AskMarcas, that is AskMarcas, on Facebook and Twitter. And we will pick out the most interesting questions and answer them in an upcoming episode of FoundersGyan. So thanks again, Tushar, for agreeing to answer some of our listeners' questions.
My pleasure, Ram.
Also, a quick disclaimer: this advice is general in nature. If you have specific questions with regards to your brand or your trademark, we suggest consulting a lawyer before taking any advice that you hear on this podcast. My logo contains my brand name. So by registering my logo, will my name get protection as well, or should I do something else?
It is a common myth that, by registering a logo, having a name will provide protection to both name as well as the logo. There is a difference between protecting a word mark and protecting a logo. So by registering a word mark, that is your brand name, will provide you protection for all fonts and phonetically similar sounds. So for example, you have registered FoundersGyan and someone comes and tries to register FoundersGyan with a different spelling, say FOOUNDERS and GYAN. So then you can stop him from using that particular mark because it is phonetically similar to your name. So, but however, in case of logo, you can only protect from using the similar logo. It has to be, the color combination comes in, and there are so many other things to check as well. So it's always better to get your brand name registered first and then logo.
I'm a bootstrapped startup. Does it make sense to register trademark right now, or should I wait to get funded?
In my opinion, initial days are the best time to register your brand name. This is because by protecting your brand name in initial days, you're not just preventing others from using your brand name, but this will also let you know whether any brand with similar or same name exists or not. So this is waiting for funding could be like too late, and someone else can register your brand name and use your brand value. So that's the whole reason why Marcas decided to offer free filing of trademark registration, just to ease out the burden
Okay, thanks Tushar for your time in answering these questions. For a limited time, Marcas is offering free filing of trademark. You just have to pay the government registration fees. More details can be had on www.marcas.in. Thank you very much, Tushar, once again for your time.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you for having me on your show again.
That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show. do leave us a review on iTunes or a comment on the show notes page. This will help us improve our show. I'll see you all next week with yet another startup and its founder. In the meantime, I do hope you got inspired and take action on your own startup today. Good luck and have a great rest of the week ahead.